Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Metarealism. This podcast will be at least somewhat controversial. Maybe not that controversial. To be honest, right now, I am not sure how controversial it will be. I guess I will tell that by what kinds of responses, if I get any responses to this podcast. Please respond to what I'm saying. I would like to enter into a dialogue with people, which has very rarely happened. Once in a while it has, but very rarely happened in the various episodes of this podcast. The reason why this particular episode will, I think, be controversial is because I am basically walking over a line that is rarely walked over by communists and revolutionary socialists. That line is talking about tendencies and rejecting the dissension which often exists between them. Not ignoring it. I mean, I recognize that there is dissension. I realize that in many cases that dissension is merited. There is a historical basis for it. But in my view, we should be trying to eliminate that dissension. We should be trying to work cooperatively across tendencies or across currents, not to enhance or develop further the tension which already exists, if that makes any sense. Well, it will in a moment. So basically, what I will do first is I will talk about my communist career, which began in 1968 when I was only 12 years old. 12 years old? Yes, 12 years old. And it went on until 1979. I was a member of the New Left. That was my entree into communism. I actually regarded myself as a communist. If you know anything about the history of communism in the United States, especially communism in New York City, which is my hometown, then you will know that many of the people who basically started communism and originated some of the American branches of various communist tendencies in the United States, especially in New York City, were Jewish. My uncle, for example, was a communist organizer in New York City. His name was Ralph Kleinman. He was a Jewish man, although non-practicing, but he was Jewish. He married a Roman Catholic woman and became a Unitarian Universalist for a while. Then he basically left Unitarian Universalism and went on his own. But my Uncle Ralph, who I just called Ralph, was a wonderful man. I really respected him because he was willing to take a risk at a time when few people were. 1950s, a time of tremendous dissension, the Army McCarthy hearings, and my Uncle Ralph was an active communist in the 1940s and the 1950s. He later became inactive. I wish I knew what tendency Ralph was a member of. I don't know why I never asked him. I mean, I spoke with him on the phone on a fairly regular basis. He lived in Whittier, California, the birthplace of the unfortunate Richard Nixon. But I never did. It just never occurred to me for whatever reason. So be it. I don't know what tendency he was in, but he was a communist organizer. My father, also from a Jewish background, who was born Harold Feigenbaum. But before I was born, my parents changed the family name from Feigenbaum to Foster, which is why I am Mark Foster, not Mark Feigenbaum. Now, whether I would have changed that name by now, I don't know. Feigenbaum is kind of long, and I don't know how well that name would have worked in radio broadcasting or theater, and that was the direction I was pursuing, so it's possible that I might have changed it. Interestingly, both my Uncle Ralph and my father had the same middle name. Why is that? I don't know. That middle name was Lawrence. Obviously, they were not related. My Uncle Ralph was the brother of my mother. My father was not the brother of my mother. So they were unrelated, but coincidentally, they had the same middle name, which is admittedly strange. Okay, so my Uncle Ralph was also involved in the New Left, but he was involved in the New Left back in the 1950s when it was first developing. I was involved in the New Left in 1968 and 1969, which was about the middle period of it. The last stage of the New Left was called the New Communist Movement. That I was not involved in. And the only reason I can give is because I knew nobody who was involved with it. My chapter of the Students' Democratic Coalition in 7th and 8th grade basically fell apart after I graduated 8th grade. I looked around to see where all of my comrades were, and they were nowhere to be found. So be it. So that is where my career in the New Left ended. The New Left itself continued in somewhat of a modified form and then basically fell apart in the 1980s. But I was not involved in it at that third and final stage. Okay, so again, initially, as a commie, I was in the New Left. Question: is the New Left a communist tendency? That is debatable. Some people would say no, and from their standpoint, they are correct. Because in the New Left, you had people of a variety of communist tendencies. You had Trotskyists of various stripes. You had Marxist-Leninists, again, of various stripes. You had autonomists. That's actually where autonomism started in the US as a part of the New Left. Autonomism was originated in Germany, but then migrated into the US, where it became a part of the New Left. But in my case, my chapter was not affiliated with any particular current. And so I would say that my chapter was a tendency unto itself. Now, whether that was true with other chapters of the Students' Democratic Coalition, I have no idea. I can only speak of my chapter since I was involved with it. But that was the beginning. That was the beginning, and only the beginning of my involvement in the New Left. Now, what I'm going to do is put on my spectacles so I can read some things to you, which basically further outline my journey through the New Left. And there is a method to my madness. I am doing this in order to make a certain argument on how various tendencies in Marxism, Marxist communism, can, or in my view, should relate to one another. After my involvement with the New Left, I became what I have written down here as a Marxist, Leninist, Titoist. If you are not familiar with Tito, he was a fascinating man. Whether you agreed with him or disagreed with him, and obviously at the time I agreed with him, these days I agree with some things he did and disagree with others. What I liked about Tito was the fact that he had a policy of openness. That meant that if you were a citizen or a resident of Yugoslavia, you could get on a train and travel anywhere in Europe. That was not true in most other Marxist-Leninist countries, but it was true in Yugoslavia. Now, did Stalin like Tito? Did Stalin like Titoism? No. But there was not much he could realistically do about it. Why? Because Stalin originated the concept of socialism in one country. And so for him to shut down Tito, silence him, or shut down Titoism would have literally contradicted socialism in one country. So he tolerated it without liking it, I think. He indicated many times he didn't like it, but he put up with it. And he also put up with Tito. When Tito died, Yugoslavia fell apart. And since then, Titoism is basically a memory. Are there still some people who identify with Titoism? Yes. Mostly, though, they call themselves market socialists. Titoism was a type of market socialism. Now, am I a market socialist right now? No, but I still respect certain aspects of it, and I admire Tito, at least in trying to stretch the boundaries of Marxism Leninism and experiment in some new uncharted areas. Okay. After I was a Titoist, I became a member of my current tendency, which I later left. We'll get to that. Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, Third Worldism, more commonly called Maoism, Third Worldism. Now, we have discussed Maoism, Third Worldism many times, since I am one. Maoism, Third Worldism is a tendency which argues that the first world, the imperialist world, headed by the United States, is not prepared for communist or revolutionary socialist movements. Why? Because if you are an oppressor nation, if you are fat and happy, why are you going to stage a revolution to switch to an entirely different system of governance? It almost never happens. And so what Maoist third worldists argue, and I think correctly, is that it is not likely, it may not even be feasible, for there to be a change from communism to communism or revolutionary socialism in the first world. But in the third world, the developing world, which is oppressed by the capitalist world system, it's like the capitalist world system has an iron foot on the third world and has kept the third world back from developing. In a place like that, or in places like that, yeah, you're going to find more openness toward making a change because people are oppressed. And when people are oppressed, they are not fat and happy. Or if they're fat, it's being fat for the wrong reason, starvation. So people in the third world more likely to change to becoming communists. I was attracted by that, but for some reason that I have tried to figure out, I left it. I don't know why. I was drawn to Maoism, Third Worldism by watching the podcasts of the great Jason Unruh, who will be starting working on his psychology degree this September. He is a brilliant man, a scholar, and if you listen to him, you would think that he has a Ph.D., but he doesn't. I think he probably will eventually, but that's just my own guess. I have no idea. But he sounds like he does. I would suggest that you go to Jason Unruh's channel and watch him, and you will know what I mean. He is an absolutely brilliant speaker. And I like him, especially when he wears the circular sunglasses. Anyway, I'm just joking, but he's a very good speaker and he expresses his ideas very well. He persuaded me to become a Maoist third worldist. I was convinced by his podcasts to become one. But then, after 9/11, I began to think, well, maybe, just maybe, 9/11 will lead people in the Western world or the first world to question capitalism. Because obviously, 9/11 was a direct attack on capitalism, a direct attack on capitalism. I mean, the World Trade Center, one of the major centers of capitalism in the Wall Street district of Manhattan. And then an attack on the Pentagon building, the headquarters of the US Department of Defense. So literally, what Al-Qaeda did is it attacked what Eisenhower called in his farewell address, the military industrial complex. That was clearly an indication that was being given by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Now, am I a fan of Al-Qaeda? No. Al-Qaeda is a right-wing movement. It is theocratic. It is fascistic. But still, I agreed with the idea. I'm trying to be careful how I say this. I agreed with the idea of people in the third world rising up and attacking the global north, but not Al-Qaeda. And I certainly do not want to be seen as a supporter of acts of military violence, because I'm not. So let me make that perfectly clear. I supported it, but in a very indirect way, not because I liked Osama bin Laden or because I liked Al-Qaeda, which is the Arabic word for the base, but because I empathized with the fact that all of these Arabs were seeing what the US was doing around the world and had been doing for a long time. And 9/11 was literally a protest against that. So for that reason, I left Maoism, Third Worldism, and became associated with and even joined several organizations associated with international socialism, sometimes called Cliffism, because its founder was Tony Cliff, who was actually a Jewish fellow born in Palestine. He was not an Israeli. He was an indigenous Jewish Palestinian. He was never able to get British citizenship. I suspect that was because he was a commie, but Britain would never grant him citizenship. But he lived in Britain for the remainder of his life anyway, in spite of his lack of citizenship. What international socialism could be considered as is a type of heterodox Trotskyism. Heterodox means atypical, meaning not standard or not orthodox Trotskyism. And I liked international socialism to an extent, although I very quickly, to be honest, became disillusioned with it. And I became involved with this other movement, although not directly, basically just by reading their literature, referred to as Maoism, left refoundationism. That's what I call it. The actual name of the organization was originally Freedom Road Socialist Organization, but now they are called Liberty Road Socialist Organization. I went through that issue a couple of days ago, why they changed their name, so there's no need to repeat that now, but they did change their name, I think, within the last couple of years. Okay, so briefly, although I already discussed this, what is left refoundationism, which I accepted? Left refoundationism is based on the idea that the left needs to be based upon new principles. And you will pardon me while I take a bit of cola because of my meds. My mouth dries out. I am unfortunately an autistic, and I have to rely upon this. So every once in a while, I have to turn to one of my trusty bottles of cola and use that to keep myself from being unable to speak. Okay, so the idea of Freedom Road, or now Liberty Road Socialist Organization, was what they called left refoundationism. Basic idea again, let's try to bring various organizations that are on the quote unquote left, I would say progressive organizations or social democratic organizations, not communist organizations, together under a new foundation. Now, what that new foundation is has never, to my knowledge, been explained. I do know that many people who identified with left refoundationism became quote unquote Bernie bros. I guess the male supporters of Bernie Sanders became Bernie bros. So maybe they agree with Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is not a communist. He's not even a democratic socialist, although he has occasionally called himself one. He was a democratic socialist 30 years ago, but he left it and became a progressive or a social democrat. So that's basically what I think left refoundationism is. I think it is simply their name for progressivism or social democracy. And they have connections with wide-ranging groups, basically progressive groups, and some groups that you might argue are to one extent or another communist, including the next group that we will talk about. But is Liberty Road Socialist Organization communist? No. Is it revolutionary socialist? Definitely not. So I think that it needs to be understood as a Maoist splinter. The other splinter, which still calls itself Freedom Road Socialist Organization, is a revolutionary, orthodox Maoist group. And as I said before, they have frequently gotten themselves into legal trouble. Many of their members over the years have been arrested. I don't know whether that's happened recently, but I know it has happened many times. Okay, so that's Liberty Road, or originally Freedom Road Socialist Organization. Okay, now let's go on to talk about other things. International socialism, Maoism, left refoundationism, and now third campism. Third campism is an approach to Trotskyism, or again, basically heterodox Trotskyism, which argues that presently there are three global camps. And I accepted this for about a decade or so. Those three camps are first, NATO, which of course is run by the US, second, Russia and its allies, and third, the proletariat and the subaltern, or the marginalized, othered people of the world. And so the idea is that the proletariat and the subaltern need to defend themselves against both Russia and NATO, that neither one is their friend. They need to be aware of what they're doing, but to act in their own interests, meaning in the interests of the proletariat and the subaltern, not in the interests of either Russia or NATO. So that's basically third campism. Now, interestingly, third campism, at least the US organization which is associated with it, known as Solidarity, has also adopted the term left refoundationism. And in fact, Solidarity and the organization that we just discussed, let me go back there for a second, Liberty Road Socialist Organization, frequently have cooperations among each other. They like each other more or less. The problem is that Freedom Road or Liberty Road socialist organization, although it is not really Maoist anymore and does not claim to be Maoist, has its roots in Maoism. Solidarity is still heterodox Trotskyist. And so for that reason, an alliance, a complete alliance between those two groups has proved to be impossible. There have been attempts over the years to create a united front between Liberty Road, Socialist Organization, and Solidarity. Those attempts have failed, and I think failed understandably. The only thing they really have in common is their shared belief in this concept of left refoundationism. But I think they both found out that that was not enough, really, to bring those two organizations into one. Okay, so that's third campism. Finally, Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, third worldism. Where did we talk about that before? Oh, yes, about 5 minutes ago. Yes, I returned to Maoism, third worldism this past June. And that was largely under the influence of my dear friend Nicole. I would strongly suggest that you join the Red Pagan Corner. Actually, it's now called the Red Pagan something else. I forget what she's changed the name to. It was called Red Pagan Corner. Red Pagan Network. Join the Red Pagan Network and also join Jason Unruh's channel. Unruh is spelled Unruhe. I would strongly suggest that you join both of those channels. Jason Unruh is the one who drew me to Maoism, third worldism the first time. Nicole, who is Red Pagan Network, is the one who drew me to Maoism, third worldism the second time. But I am friends with all of them. I'm comrades with them. Most of us are podcasters. So we are basically a tendency of podcasters. It's kind of weird. Seems weird to me, but it is. That's exactly what we are. Whether all of us are podcasters, that I don't know. I would suspect that there are some who are not. There's one guy I know who is a Maoist third worldist, and I am not aware of him having a podcast. But to be honest, I haven't asked him either. He might, and I might just not know about it. So in any event, that's really off the point. The idea is that I have gone through a plethora of different communist tendencies. So what has that done for me? Not much. Well, what it has done for me is it has made me open to a large number of tendencies in communism, meaning I am the opposite of being closed-minded. I think that's called being open-minded, but if that's not true, please correct me on that. I am open-minded. I do not have any hostility toward most other communist tendencies, or as they are sometimes also called, currents. In fact, I admire many of them, even those that I sometimes strongly disagree with. I admire them. For example, autonomism, which was originally called workerism. I love autonomism or workerism, which in the US started as a part of the New Left after it was imported from Europe. Autonomism is a very individualistic tendency. It is not interested in vanguard parties, for example, fighting the revolution in advance of other people getting involved. It is more interested in creating disruptions, or what they sometimes call communization, which is basically creating disruptions that by disrupting life, by making life difficult, you can actually help bring about communism. Now, is that true? I don't know. I've never been an autonomist or a workerist, but I like them. I think that is a really interesting idea. So I suppose I tend to look at communism and Marxism not only as a practitioner, but as a sociologist, meaning I just find Marxism and communism to be fascinating, and I love studying it. And I don't care whether I agree with a tendency or a current that much. Well, I mean, I care in terms of whether I would adopt it in my own life, but in terms of my respect for it, no. There is a lot of tension between different tendencies, in particular between Marxist Leninist tendencies and Trotskyist tendencies. Since I have been a member of a few Marxist Leninist tendencies and two Maoist tendencies, I don't have that same feeling. I have also been a member of two Trotskyist tendencies. So what do I have to complain about? The answer is nothing. And so I guess, a kind of rare bird, which may upset some other people. Do I care? Not really. Professors, in case you don't know any professors generally pride ourselves. Maybe pride is the wrong word because that sounds kind of arrogant, but we like the idea of challenging existing modes of thinking. And I've always thought that way myself. I do not like conformity. I like nonconformity. And so for me, by being open to a wide variety of tendencies, even though I don't follow them right now, I am a Maoist third worldist, and I plan to be a Maoist third worldist for the rest of my life, which I doubt will be that much longer, since I am already 68 years old. Well, I may live a lot longer, but I can't live that much longer. My father died when he was 89, so maybe I will live another 21 years, possibly. Do I want to live that long? No, because the last few years of my father's life were horrible. He developed really, really bad dementia. He literally forgot who he was. I do not want to be in that situation. I would rather be dead before that happens to me. In fact, I wish that my father would have died 3 years earlier than he did. And I think he would have liked that too. He was very, very unhappy as a person with dementia. Plus, he knew he had dementia. That was the even sadder part. He would sit in his room at the assisted living facility and repeat the term dementia, 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 dementia over and over and over and over again. Then when he would go into the cafeteria and they would serve mashed potatoes, he would eat the mashed potatoes with his hands. It was very depressing for me as his son, watching my father, who was a dignified World War II veteran, a floor leader in his union, the only communist union to have ever existed in the United States. And no, the Wobblies are not a communist union, they are a syndicalist union. So I really admire him for what he did, and I feel bad that he died under such tragic circumstances. Okay, so based upon this, and I guess I'm kind of wrapping it up now, kind of wasting time more than anything else. Um, I don't like the dissension, or I guess you could call it sectarianism, which exists among communists and Marxists, not only in the US, but around the world. The fact that some communists literally hate each other. And I'm not exaggerating. They literally hate each other. They won't talk to each other. I couldn't be that way. I mean, to me, anybody who is fighting for revolutionary change, anybody who is fighting to overturn the capitalist world system, even if I might not agree with their way of doing it, deserves to be supported. Because how do I know? Maybe my way of doing it is wrong, and their way of doing it is right. There's no way I have of knowing that. And so I respect people in virtually all communist tendencies. There are some exceptions, to be honest. Although I respect autonomism or workerism, I dislike its strongly individualistic focus. But the fact that autonomism and workerism are so individualistic, which puts them at odds with most other communist tendencies, also makes me like them. So I both disagree with them and I like them. Now, could I ever be a workerist or an autonomist? No, I never have been, and I couldn't be. That's not the way I look at Marxism or communism. But I've read a lot of stuff written by workerists or autonomists, and many of them are the same people. Many people call themselves by both names. And some of their stuff is really, really good. For example, the term empire, which is used to refer to the American empire, the empire run by the US, which of course includes most of Europe, Canada, Western Europe, Israel, and so on. That term empire was coined by autonomists, and I use it. So even with autonomism, although I may not agree with it entirely, I respect it. And there are certain aspects of it, like talking about the empire, that I think are extraordinarily commendable. Take off my eyeglasses since I really don't need them anymore. So in any event, I hope that has been reasonably understandable. I hope that information has been useful. I realize that may put me in a position of being an outsider with respect to some other communists, people who are very sectarian. I'm just not a sectarian person. I never have been. I cannot be sectarian. Somebody would need to teach me how to be sectarian. I would literally have to learn it. And do I want to learn it? Well, I wouldn't mind learning more about it, but I would not want to become sectarian. I wouldn't want to learn how to become a sectarian person. No, not really. I mean, I know what sectarianism is. I'm a sociologist of religion. I study sects and denominations and so forth. So nobody needs to tell me what sectarianism is. And I know enough about sectarianism in studying religion that I know I dislike it just as much, if not more, in communism or Marxism. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.